Why Botswana has the best democracy in Africa. The Europe in Africa, kindly subscribe to our channel. Botswana is a parliamentary republic in which the president of Botswana is both head of state and head of government. The nation's politics are based heavily on British parliamentary politics and on traditional Botswana chiefdom. The legislature is made up of the unicameral National Assembly and the advisory body of tribal chiefs, the Entlo ya Dikasi. The National Assembly chooses the president. The Botswana Democratic Party, BDP, rules as a dominant party. While elections are considered free and fair by observers, the BDP has controlled the National Assembly since independence. Political opposition often exists between factions in the BDP rather than through separate parties, though several opposition parties exist and regularly hold a small number of seats in the National Assembly. Botswana achieved independence from the United Kingdom in 1966. The BDP led by Seretse Khama formed the first government, and continued winning elections every 5 years. Botswana has an above-average human rights record, and it is recognized by human rights groups as one of the strongest democracies in Africa. Economic policy in Botswana revolves around the nation's lucrative diamond industry, which makes up a significant portion of the economy. The country has been praised as an economic success as it pursued free market policies in the 20th century, and it has since shifted to more redistributive economic policy. Wealth inequality remains high and welfare programs are limited, but public services and infrastructure receive strong funding. Foreign policy in Botswana has historically emphasized multilateralism and realpolitik. Apartheid-era South Africa was the nation's primary foreign policy concern until 1994 and then instability in Zimbabwe thereafter. Pre-statehood. The location of present-day Botswana was historically controlled by Bantu peoples, primarily the Tswana people. Many legal traditions practiced by the Tswana people, such as respect for traditional authority and protection of property rights, have played a role in the development of post-colonial Botswana politics. Presidency of Seretse Khama. Upon receiving self-governance, the nation held the 1965 Bechuanaland general election, in which the BDP won a large victory. Of the 31 seats in the legislature, the BDP won 28. 3 members of the Botswana People's Party made up the opposition, all elected from relatively urbanist constituencies. The government under the first president, Seretse Khama, was based heavily on collaborative governance similar to that of the pre-colonial tribal governments. Policies were often considered by several ministries and a commission before being adopted. Khama also ensured that foreign involvement was welcome, opposed to a nationalism that restricted opportunity. 1998, present. Mosier stepped down as president in 1998, and Vice President Magai became president. He chose Ian Khama as vice president, and while the two were nominally non-factional, they effectively supported the A-team faction of Marafi and Kate. This caused the factional differences in the party to further escalate. A schism also formed in the oppositional BNF, which led to the creation of the Botswana Congress Party in 1998. Enough assemblymen defected that this new party became the primary opposition, but they were replaced by BNF candidates in the 1999 general election. Magai's tenure as president ended in 2008, and Ian Khama, the son of President Seretse Khama, became president. The BDP underwent its first split in 2010 when Khama encouraged the Barata Fati faction to leave the party. Khama stepped down in 2018, and Vice President Mokgweetsi Masisi became president. He immediately reversed Khama's policies and replaced top officials who had been appointed by Khama. The two former allies quickly became political rivals, and Khama defected from the Botswana Democratic Party. He instead aligned with the newly formed Botswana Patriotic Front in addition to supporting the Umbrella for Democratic Change. This made the 2019 general election the first competitive election in the nation's history, but the BDP remained in power with 52.7% of the total vote, winning 38 of the 57 seats in the assembly. The rivalry significantly escalated when Masisi pursued criminal charges against Kama for illegal ownership of firearms in 2022, causing Kama to seek asylum in South Africa. Executive Branch. The executive branch of Botswana is headed by the President of Botswana, who serves as both the head of state and head of government. The President is indirectly elected by members of the National Assembly, and the position has historically been associated with a major tribe. The executive is the strongest branch of government in Botswana, and the President wields significant power, effectively heading the legislative branch of government as well. The judiciary is the only de facto check on the President's power. The President has the power to veto legislation by refusing to sign it, which returns the legislation to the National Assembly. The President is also the Commander-in-Chief of the nation's military. The Vice President of Botswana and the Cabinet of Botswana operate underneath the President of Botswana. The President chooses the Vice President and the members of the Cabinet from the members of the National Assembly. Economic policy. Botswana is an upper-middle-income country with a mixed economy, and it has one of the strongest economies in Africa. The foundation of Botswana's economic policy was set by the first post-independence government in the 1960s, incorporating a self-sustaining budget system through a series of national development plans. There is significant income inequality in Botswana, particularly between the relatively developed urban areas and the poorer rural areas. The unemployment rate in Botswana was 20% as of 2015. Botswana's dependence on the diamond industry has led to diversification of the economy becoming one of the nation's major economic policy goals throughout its history. Government programs such as the National Development Bank, the Botswana Development Corporation, the Financial Assistance Policy, and the Economic Diversification Drive have been implemented to spur economic growth in other industries, but they have not significantly decreased the nation's dependence on its diamond industry. The economy of colonial Bechuanaland focused on cattle farming, and this was the primary industry for the first decade of Botswana's independence. As most of the nation was involved with this field in some form, there was little cause for class conflict in the predominantly rural population. While land distribution was sometimes an issue, there was enough unclaimed land that cattle farmers could operate as nomads, further reducing disagreement over economic issues. In 1967, diamond deposits were found in Botswana. This incentivized the government to pursue a commodity economy from mining, supplemented with smaller industries such as beef farming, manufacturing, and tourism. The country's economic success is attributed to neoliberal policies of free markets and private property protections, significantly increasing the population's post-independence living standards. Botswana was one of the only sub-Saharan governments that did not engage in significant regulatory or redistributive policy following decolonization. This, as well as its fiscally responsible management of the diamond industry, led to some of the world's largest economic growth over the following decades. More recent development has emphasized welfare statehood through redistributive economic policy. Foreign policy. The President is responsible for the foreign policy of Botswana, overseeing the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Botswana's political and economic success relative to other countries in Africa has led it to play a larger role in regional and global affairs. By the end of the 20th century, Botswana had begun sending financial and military support to neighboring countries and international organizations. Botswana has emphasized multilateralism in its foreign policy. Its landlocked territory and export-driven economy have incentivized it to maintain strong diplomatic ties with other countries, and its low population and proximity to unstable governments have caused Botswana to work closely with international organizations for security and resources. From 1966 to 1994, the countries bordering Botswana were unstable or otherwise hostile to Botswana. It did not establish formal relations with its largest neighbor, South Africa, during the latter's discriminatory apartheid rule. In its first years, Botswana had no military. The Botswana Defense Force was eventually created in response to regional instability. As South Africa liberalized after 1994, Botswana's primary foreign policy concern became the instability in neighboring Zimbabwe. For much of its history as an independent country, Botswana practiced a realpolitik foreign policy. During the presidency of Ian Khama, it shifted to an idealist foreign policy, in which it routinely criticized governments for human rights violations. During this period, it was often the only member of the African Union to support the International Criminal Court or to condemn human rights violations in autocratic nations. Social policy. Botswana's relative wealth compared to other countries in the region has allowed for high spending on public services such as education, health, and infrastructure. As of 2014, the Ministry of Education and Skills Development had the largest budget of any government initiative. Approximately 10,000 kilometers of road were paved in the first 50 years of the country's independence, compared to the 50 kilometers that existed before independence. Welfare programs in Botswana are relatively limited and subject to means testing, and there is no national-level social security. The country's predominantly arid environment results in droughts becoming a frequent public welfare concern. HIV/AIDS is the most serious healthcare issue in the country, and the HIV/AIDS epidemic in Botswana is one of the most severe outbreaks in the world. Botswana received less foreign aid when combating the epidemic in the 1990s, allowing it to spread. Human rights. Freedom House considers Botswana to be free with a score of 72/100 in its 2022 Freedom in the World report. It scored high in political rights, though Freedom House expressed concerns regarding the representation of women and minorities and the lack of freedom of information laws. It also scored high in civil rights, though Freedom House expressed concerns regarding freedom of the press and the right to strike. Transparency International has regularly recognized Botswana as the least corrupt country in Africa, and it is often described as comparable to the liberal democracies of Western Europe. One potential issues for human rights in Botswana is the lack of strong checks and balances in the government, which allows the president to exercise wide latitude over policy and arbitrarily curtail free speech. Early focus on public works projects after Botswana's independence rather than militarization is credited for early legitimacy of the government, permitting stability in the nation's politics. Conceptions of human rights in Botswana are shaped by collectivist traditions such as Botho philosophy rather than individualist traditions. Confrontational approaches to human rights such as protest, strike action, and public condemnation are often seen as uncivil foreign inventions. Activism in Botswana instead focuses mainly on providing goods and services to those in need. Human rights non-governmental organizations are relatively uncommon in Botswana. Among the most active is the Botswana Network on Ethics, Law, and HIV/AIDS, which emphasizes response to HIV but also addresses other areas such as the rights of women, children, and LGBT people. Kindly subscribe to our channel.